Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I want to thank Under Secretary McCord and all of the leadership with the Department of Defense, and particularly our service members and their family members for their service every single day in protecting our national security. Too often in these hearings, we tend to get wound up in partisan talking points, and for some reason, we don't focus on the very people that we are here to pass a budget to serve, and that's the American people. And in this case, our service members who need the resources to be successful when they need it. So I'm sure I don't have to remind Under Secretary McCord, Department of Defense acquisition and modernization programs take years of planning and development. They require consistent and reliable funding in follow-on years to meet the needs of warfighters. Funding for our national defense is not some political prop that can be held up to score cheap political points. And yet, for all the bluster that we're hearing from some of my colleagues about the DoD's top line, it was their side of the aisle that held up the omnibus spending package for fiscal year 22 for nearly 6 months. They delayed putting critical, important, major acquisition programs at risk, prevented new programs from starting, and delayed pay raises for service members. Additionally, they degraded readiness at an extremely dangerous moment. And for the record, Joe Biden is the commander-in-chief. And when our allies needed us most, he's the one who helped to bring them together to make sure that we're holding Russia accountable. Inconsistent funding emboldens our adversaries and undermines the trust of our allies, a trust that we have had to fight hard to restore after the previous administration. So I want to be clear that the tactics are not just partisan ploys. They have real life effects for my district, for my constituents, and for service members around the world. Now, last year, I supported an increased top line for DoD spending. And this year, like every year, I will work hard in a nonpartisan way to ensure that the capabilities and systems included in the Pentagon's budget request are reviewed. Only after a careful assessment of the threat environment and our capabilities can we decide if an increase is again necessary to meet the complex challenges of our ever-evolving strategic environment. Under Secretary McCord, in my previous discussion with Department of Defense leaders, they have stressed to me that continuing resolutions do far more damage to readiness and the well-being of our service members than any of the hollow complaints we've heard here today. Could you please speak to the impacts that CRs have on military readiness and the importance of consistent funding for our most critical modernization programs?
Thank you for that question. Yes, this is something I think that is not well understood, and it's been hard to translate to the public because the organism that is the Department of Defense has adapted to perpetual CRs in a way that therefore you don't see contracts expiring because nobody tries to write a contract in the first quarter of a fiscal year anymore because they know that you're going to be under a CR and not going to be able to enter into new contracts. So there's the issue, first of all, of delayed resources, especially when there's inflation, but even when there's not, time is money, and when we lose time, we lose ability to be agile, we lose resources. This year was particularly bad, as you say. It's sort of the threat to have a full year CR, which has never happened to the Department of Defense in history, was particularly troublesome to us, and we had a hearing. I had a hearing with the service chiefs before the House Appropriations Committee that spoke to this issue in some detail in January to lay out the problems. As you may know, we had a history beginning with sort of the fall of the Berlin Wall for about 20 years where the Department of Defense Appropriations Bill got enacted on average about 25 days into the fiscal year, which is reasonable. But beginning with the threat of default in 2011 that led to the Budget Control Act, continuing since that day, that average has ballooned to 120 days into the fiscal year on average over the last dozen years compared to 25 days for the 20 years before that. So we have definitely gotten into a bad pattern that needs to be broken. It does cost money. It does make us less agile when a number of members have pointed out that China does move fast, and we need to be able to, we can't afford to give away 3, 4, 5 months of a fiscal year every year to our adversaries by hamstringing ourselves.
Thank you. I know my time's expired. I just hope that all of us can come together and make sure that America succeeds by helping our service members and their families in this budget. I yield back.